Hey guys, Ed Asher from National Cannabis Media. Last week we were fortunate enough to be able to spend the day in Las Vegas with Dr. Sue Sisley and Eugene Monroe touring the Grove Dispensary and their warehouse and production site. After some dinner and some drinks later on in the evening, we thought, what the heck, how about we sit down for a quick little interview? So I broke out my camera gear, my microphones, and my lights, set it up, we sat down and had a quick candid conversation about what exactly they were doing in Las Vegas and what their causes are. Sue, what are we doing in Las Vegas?
We're hosting a huge forum tomorrow with the Brookings Institute and our incredible NFL star, Eugene Monroe, who's been so gracious to join us in the discussion about barriers to cannabis research. And we've been really lucky to find an ally in Eugene who's willing to help us shine a spotlight on how absurd the situation is, where the U.S. government has systematically impeded marijuana efficacy research in the U.S. And he, along with a lot of other professional athletes, have legitimate questions about how cannabis works and what and why is it that the NFL and NBA continue to ban this as an alternative treatment for them. So I'm here because we've been trying to help navigate the study through the regulatory process. Here we are 7 years after the initial submission to the FDA, and we still have not enrolled our first veteran in the study. So I think our study is a perfect example of the myriad ways that the government has, layered so many ridiculous hurdles to be able to conduct this work. There's just layers and layers of government red tape that are often insurmountable for most scientists, but we would never turn our backs on this work. It doesn't matter how many years it takes us to get this done. We will persevere until we get this study underway and completed and the data published in peer-reviewed medical journals.
And so you've recently been given approval to conduct this study. You've run into some barriers in the past. I'm sure most people are aware of with Arizona State University. Is that correct?
Yes.
But now you've overcome those hurdles and you've been given some approval to conduct a study, and yet you're still running into bureaucratic problems.
Oh yeah. I mean, the problem is the main challenge we have is that none of these agencies have any timeline. So they can take 10 months or 10 years to review a certain inquiry. And that's how they've effectively stonewalled this work, just by delays. And they know that most scientists can't deal with the situation. They live in a publish or perish system at a university where if you're not constantly producing science, you're fired. And so that's how the government, the DEA, they can continue to stonewall this work for years, and they know that most scientists will just walk away. But we won't, and we're inspired by folks like Eugene that are willing to put their reputations on the line in order to back science. I mean, Eugene has put personal money in investing in research that will have no return for him. This is not like folks who he's not part of a for-profit institution that's going to earn money from this research. He is strictly interested in the data, and that's why we're probably the most unlikely friends you would ever meet, because here I'm a scientist and he's this big-time pro athlete, and we really have no business hanging out with each other. Mm-hmm. But suddenly we have this common ground that we both care deeply about seeing the science advance and seeing that marijuana research is no longer handcuffed by politics. And so that's what brought us together, and that's why I'm so I'm so honored to be sitting next to him, because I think that nobody would expect us to have anything in common, and yet he is an intellectual. He defies all the stereotypes that people may have about professional athletes. He has an incredible base of knowledge in marijuana and cannabis science already, and I'm just thrilled that he's part of this movement. And I wanted to give him this because this is how I got involved in this process. The veterans, we have an epidemic of veteran suicide in this counthere, where with the VA reported a couple of years ago that we lose 22 veterans each day to suicide. And so the vets put this dog tag together, which I'm wearing. They engraved the number 22 and to kind of build awareness about what is a really serious public health crisis. And the fact is the government has no solutions for these veterans. They continue to suffer every day. We don't know how to help. I wonder, and I know you wonder, could cannabis help curb this epidemic of veteran suicide? And we won't know that because the government continues to block the meaningful research that might answer that. But in the meantime, I know the veterans wanted you to have this dog tag, and we hope that you'll wear it. And
I definitely will.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now, Eugene, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you're the only actively participating NFL athlete that is outspoken about in support of cannabis as for medicinal use or the use of alternatives to opioids or any sort of pain relief that you're normally prescribed by the league.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. I am currently the only active professional athlete openly advocating for the need for our policies to reform in regards to using medical cannabis. Currently, most of the major sports leagues, if not all, punish to some degree, and those punishments build and increasingly get to the point where careers end when a player tests positive for marijuana. That's an archaic process in policy. We now know that there's great medical value in cannabis, and we need to continue to take a look at that. Preliminarily, we also have an issue throughout the sports leagues with chronic pain and concussions and a litany of other health issues that cannabis has shown to be a benefit for and far safer than the drugs that we're currently prescribed to deal with those issues.
Now, earlier at dinner tonight, I asked you what was the straw that broke the camel's back, because you can't be the only athlete in your shoes that is feeling this way, yet you're the only one that is outspoken in the way you are. What changed that made you decide to pipe up and take on kind of the potential consequences that you might be facing?
This past football season was very rough on me, both physically and mentally. I started the season not finishing the first drive before having a concussion, which put me out not only the remainder of that game, but 3 games after. Came back strong and injured my shoulder. Missed a few games after injuring my shoulder, rehabbed, came back, hurt it again, and ultimately my season was over. And during that time period, from experiencing all the symptoms of the concussion and for a 2-week period being totally incoherent and sometimes not knowing who I was, that was really scary. And also hurting my shoulder and dealing with not only the pain from those injuries in my shoulder, but the cumulative pain from all the injuries that I've had over an 18-year football career from the time I started playing till now. And those injuries and things build up, and you get hurt, and then you play on that, and then chronic issues build up like arthritis. And these are things that all players deal with, but no one really openly talks about it until they leave the game, because we're trained to be the toughest people on the planet who fight through this adversity. So you don't talk about that pain because everyone experiences that pain. Well, that pain's not okay, and there are safer ways to mitigate it than what we're currently doing.
It's a great point. I'm reminded when you talk about there's the training and the dealing with the pain. As a combat veteran myself, I know that the rigors that we go through in training. I'm not a grunt, but I am very aware of the training that the grunts go through. Their day-to-day life is just carrying heavy stuff and shooting well and carrying heavy stuff farther and then shooting better day in, day out, and then they go to war and they do all that stuff. So it's not unlike a professional athlete where the day in, day out beat down piles up on you until one day, 20 years later, you can't stand up straight or walk down a flight of stairs. I understand that you've been doing some work with veterans and veterans advocacy as far as cannabis. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So recently, I spent time with the men down at Baltimore Station in South Baltimore. and it's fascinating going there and spending time with men who've sacrificed for our country and in turn are experiencing a great deal of strife in their lives as a result of it. Initially, I went there not knowing what to expect, and what I got out of it was, here are men that need help for various reasons, and one major thing that is recurring, and it's even consistent in sports, is PTSD, living continuously with trauma from the past and various other issues that onset that, and we know that cannabis is something that can certainly play a role in alleviating some of those stresses. Some of the men I spoke to have trouble walking down the street, have trouble having a conversation with people they know, people they should be comfortable with, but just there's certain things that just affect them that shouldn't, and we need to find solutions for them. It's leading to very devastating things, and we know, like Dr. Sisley said, veterans are killing themselves behind this, and it needs to stop. It's irresponsible to let this continue.
I agree. I have a friend of mine who's on my team. I'm still in the reserves, and a friend of mine that's on my reserve team, I was talking to Sue about this earlier tonight at dinner. One day he stopped returning my text messages, and he's pretty prompt with coming back at me with text messages, and so I think I was trying to borrow some golf clubs or something one day, and he would not respond to me, and so I started calling him names and doing the whole locker room banter, and I'm like, fine, jerk, you don't want to respond to me, that's whatever. Well, then it came drill weekend, and we needed to arrange some rides to the airport. There's like 4 of us in the States, so there's no need for all of us to go to the airport at the same time, or individually. And finally he got back to me, and I yelled at him for not responding to my text messages, and he's like, sorry, it's been a rough couple of days. I'm like, oh, damn, man, is everything okay? I'll tell you about it. Well, long story short, we met up at the airport, and he tells me that he had a total breakdown because he changed physicians, and one of his previous psych doctor had taken off whatever medication regimen he was on, and it was like 4 weeks later he had a total meltdown, screamed at his 2-year-old autistic son for nothing, and then like just broke down in a ball of nothing on the floor and he ended up checking himself into the mental hospital for a couple of days to kind of get reevaluated. He said he found some clarity, got on a new medication regimen, that the veterans effect, it really hits home, but it's not only applied to veterans. The process of, or the bureaucratic convolution of the medical industry and just the medical process of one doctor to another, to insurance, to other insurance, co-pays, this and that, what medication is covered, what's not covered, those side effects that those medications can have. You move one doctor to another, and all of a sudden you're not covered, your psych meds aren't covered, and then you have these types of reactions, and these types of reactions could easily be mitigated, maybe using cannabis. But we don't have the evidence yet, right, Dr. Sisley? We don't have the evidence because it's all anecdotal at the moment, right? We haven't done the empirical studies and the control groups and all that stuff.
That's true. It's unfortunate that the medical community demands randomized controlled trials. They don't want to look at case reports, case series, observational studies even have little credibility with physicians, and that's why we have this constant challenge whether you're a pro athlete or you're a veteran or anyone, when you go to see your doctor, most physicians have been trained in a very conservative medical model where they never are even exposed to the idea that the endocannabinoid system exists in the human body. They never learn about the fact that every human body has an endocannabinoid system, that it's the most important physiologic mechanism in the human body, and that using the external plant to affect that system is often therapeutic, and we never learn. The only thing we get in medical school curriculum is that marijuana is a deeply dangerous drug, highly addictive, and should be avoided. And so this is the problem. We're producing physicians nonstop that are just clueless on what this ECS is. So we don't even have docs who can talk intelligently with someone like Eugene about the therapeutic potential of the plant. So until we get rigorous controlled trials that the physician community can read in their journals. They need to be published in peer-reviewed medical journals. And one of the problems we're seeing all kinds of great examples of patients having remarkable responses to cannabis, but they're not documenting this anywhere. So even a case report published in a peer-reviewed journal could be impactful, but the problem is that physicians don't even take the time to publish these case reports, and so we're losing out on tons of important information. The bottom line in the medical world is if it's not documented, if it's not published, it doesn't exist. So physicians really have a duty to our patients to publish data, good and bad, about cannabis, put it all into the public domain. And then also to change laws that are detrimental to patients. And clearly all these laws blocking cannabis research need to be changed. And then on top of that, we have to look at the laws that are also keeping that continue to criminalize this plant. Those laws also need to be completely reevaluated, and like the harms of criminalizing this plant are so obvious. This war on drugs, war on cannabis specifically, has really ruined the fabric of society in so many ways. And I think that one of the problems we have now is that we have a situation where we have only 24 states that allow safe, legal access to lab-tested cannabis, and so all these other states are just out of luck. I mean, that's a really tragic situation that all these families are having to uproot their entire lives in order to gain access to this. I don't know, it's deeply frustrating. I know it is for, here Eugene is in another state that has had the medical cannabis law now for a couple years and still hasn't even implemented the program. So, but even when they do implement it, Eugene won't have access to it. And so that is another system that I'm so grateful that he's questioning this on behalf of all of the athletes. Why is it that Major League Baseball players are allowed to have access to cannabis throughout their active service, whereas NBA, NFL are not allowed, and they're routinely lab tested for cannabis? Why is there that dichotomy? It doesn't make sense.
Of course. We're running short on time, so Dr. Sisley, if you could summarize your the message you want to send tomorrow in maybe a sentence, what would that be?
I would say we just want to make the public aware of the relentless barriers to marijuana efficacy research, and we want the public to stand with us, shoulder to shoulder, as we demand changes, as we demand that these barriers be dismantled, that the DEA monopoly be ended, and that other expert growers in the country be licensed to provide cannabis for research.
Perfect. Eugene, if you could summarize in a sentence what your message tomorrow would be.
Many of these things all end in one word, which is compassion. We have people suffering all around our country, and the ability for that suffering to be alleviated is essentially stonewalled by different laws, the inability to get people to have compassion for people who are suffering, can benefit from cannabis, and we need to continue to educate people so they know that this is something that is definitely medically applicable, and we need to also continue to research because it's not perfect, right? It is a drug, and there may be issues there, but we do know that it's safer at this point than what we're currently doing.